The Seattle Kraken are now officially the NHL's 32nd team, and they could even, just maybe, be starting out life with an actual legitimate NHL star. What's cracking, everybody? I'm Scott, and this is the show where we talk all about what's been going on with the Seattle Kraken, or in this case, what could potentially happen in the next few months. But we start with the exciting, though inevitable and completely expected news that the Kraken did finally make their final NHL payment to officially become the 32nd franchise in the league. Now, again, granted, yes, this piece of news was inevitable ever since the league announced they would be expanding to Seattle back in 2018. But it still does have some significance because now, again, with that last payment in, they can start officially joining team meetings and start talking to free agents. Not to mention talking to the other teams about potential trades they might want to be making for the expansion draft coming up in a couple of months. And it's a good thing they made it official too, because recently we also got another look inside Climate Pledge Arena and the progress that's being made on the Kraken's future home. Most notably recently getting pictures of crews pouring the concrete slab that will go under the ice that the Kraken will eventually play on. Once again, this is just another really cool thing that is yet another sign that this is getting more and more real each day, that we are actually getting an NHL team in Seattle. Again, not like that's something we didn't already know, but it is cool to see the progress towards that becoming an actual reality. I mean, how can you not get excited with that clear ice rink shape in the ground of that new arena? As far as news surrounding things that we don't know exactly what to expect from, we did see that players are starting to agree to waive no movement clauses, with Lucic in Calgary agreeing to waive his for the expansion draft. And on top of that, with some teams that aren't going to be in the playoffs now conducting their exit interviews, things in Buffalo in particular have gotten quite interesting. And that brings us to the main thing that I wanted to talk about today, and the possibility, even if it is an unlikely one and a bit of a dream, that Seattle could have a legitimate star player in their first year by potentially making a trade for Jack Eichel. Now, this already will not be the first offseason in which there will be serious questions about Eichel's future in Buffalo, or if he even will be with the team at the start of the following season, as he has over the last couple of years expressed frustration over Buffalo's lack of competing and playing meaningful games towards the end of the season, because he is a type of player that should be playing in the playoffs and hasn't been able to yet in his career. But things may have gotten even worse and gotten more serious about him actually leaving this time around, as in his exit interview, with some of the injury issues that he had that kept him out for the second half of this season, he said that he's basically focused on getting healthy for next season, regardless of where that will be. And then went on to express his clear frustration with the fact that he wanted to get surgery on his neck in order to start the healing process and hopefully heal a little bit more thoroughly. However, the team decided that they didn't want him to get surgery, and when it was asked whether or not that's just a decision he can make because it's his body, he said that the team holds a lot of cards in the contract that he doesn't really have that kind of say in. Which I have to say seems like a pretty dumb way for the Sabres to be handling this. I mean, even if they were committed to keeping him around long term, and they want him to be playing on their team next season, then you'd think that they'd want him to come back at 100%, which the surgery would probably allow, even if it did keep him out towards the beginning of the season, instead of having him come back at only like 60-70%, but being there for the whole time, and then risking re-injuring it in a worse way. But not only that, this is your best player, the face of your franchise, and he again has expressed frustrations already over the last couple of years that now you're only going to make much worse by telling him that he can't even get the treatment he wants for an injury that could affect his future even beyond hockey. So to me at least, it now does seem pretty inevitable that Eichel is on his way out of Buffalo, and probably sooner rather than later, as I don't know that he'll even be on the team going into next season, and even if he is, might be gone by the trade deadline. First off, in all of this though, I do have to say that I feel really bad for the Sabres fan base. I mean, not only is this team about to set a record for the longest playoff drought in league history, which as a Mariners fan I can understand how that feels, but now they're having to deal with constant rumors of their star player and really the only reason worth watching their team wanting out of the team and being treated poorly on the way out, which is somewhat like the scenario Seahawks fans dealt with for at least a couple of weeks with Russell Wilson, but that got fixed and I don't think this is going to. So then as far as where Eichel ends up, well, there are teams that might seem more likely than Seattle, like the Rangers, who have been constantly rumored to be the place that he might end up going, or there's always teams that could offer a number of decent prospects in return without hurting themselves too much, like Tampa Bay, for example, or there's always a team like Vegas who seem to be in on every big player move that goes on. And for a team that's in the position that Buffalo is, if they are getting rid of Eichel, they're basically committing to going into another full rebuild. So they would need something in the way of prospects or a decent amount of draft capital in return. And obviously, when it comes to prospects or even players in general, that's not something that Seattle has to offer in a trade, at least right now anyway. But what Seattle does have quite a bit of that is worth even more now than it ever has been is cap space. In case you haven't heard by now, the last year in sports has been marked by losing quite a bit of revenue over this thing called COVID. And as a result, the NHL's salary cap is going to be staying flat for at least the next couple of seasons, if not longer into the future. And that's not something that teams were planning when they were signing contracts over the last few years. Which means that contracts that may have once looked reasonable with the assumption that the salary cap would continue to go up year over year now look like bad contracts. And contracts that already looked bad now look debilitatingly bad. And even teams that don't have a whole lot of bad contracts would still have to do a lot of moving things around in order to make space for Eichel's contract that has him earning $10 million a year for the next 5 seasons. Now, obviously, for a player like Eichel, that's something that most teams would be more than willing to take on figuring out in order to get him. But the point is, he's not going to be able to just plug into any lineup without some serious changes being made in order to make room for him. But there is at least one team who does have a significant amount of cap wiggle room, say somewhere around $81.5 million worth of it. Yep, this is where the Seattle Kraken come in. Now, again, this is not all about making room for Eichel's contract because, again, pretty much any team would be willing to do that. No, this is also the fact that Seattle has the cap room in order to use that as a trade piece in order to get Eichel. Because something Buffalo also has is a couple of those debilitatingly bad contracts. Most notably, that Jeff Skinner contract with the no movement clause attached to it that has the player who was either healthy scratched or playing on the 4th line for a large chunk of this last season, earning $9 million per year through the 26-27 season. Now, with the expansion draft coming up, this could very well be Buffalo's last chance to move that contract without having to pay the rest of it. And we talked about in the Buffalo expansion video the possibility of Buffalo moving that contract as a part of a trade, but still probably end up retaining some of it. This, however, a trade for Eichel, would offer the type of opportunity where Seattle could take on the entirety of that contract as part of the payment for Eichel. Now, even in this era of cap hell that the NHL is entering into, a player like Eichel is still probably worth more than making $19 million worth of space over the next 5 seasons. Though freeing up nearly a fourth of your cap for the next few seasons is a pretty significant chunk. So even with the fact that Eichel's trade value right now is probably the lowest it's ever going to be considering his neck injury and the fact that he clearly wants out of Buffalo, the Sabres should and probably will still demand more than just moving a couple of big contracts. And again, there Seattle is a little bit limited as they don't have players to offer, but they do have every draft pick for the next 3 seasons, including this year's first round pick, which they have the 3rd best odds at the 1st overall pick, with one of those teams having better odds being Buffalo, and are guaranteed to be picking in the top 5. Now, it was rumored sometime around the trade deadline that Buffalo was looking for somewhere in the ballpark of 4 first-round picks in exchange for Eichel, but they were also looking for a first-round pick in exchange for Tyler Hall, and we saw how that worked out. So I don't know that they'd be getting quite that much. Plus, it would help that Seattle could offer an early first-round pick at least in this year's draft, which is definitely going to be worth more than a later first-round pick that a team with Eichel would probably be offering down the road. Though, granted, an early first-round pick in this year's draft is not going to have quite as high of a value as it would in almost any other year's draft, but still, it does offer quite a bit more flexibility to make sure you get the player you want. Though, again, another issue with trading picks to Buffalo is the fact that they don't have scouts. So then the question is what they could do with those picks, but as long as they value them, that's all that really matters. So in the end, in exchange for getting Eichel, Seattle could offer something along the lines of taking on the rest of the Skinner contract, as well as sending Buffalo their first round pick in this year's draft, as well as maybe a first or second round pick in next year's draft. And if you're going to ask whether or not that's worth it for a player like Eichel, yep, it's definitely worth it for one of the best players in the NHL. That being said, do I think it's particularly likely to happen? Well, no, probably not. Not to Seattle, just because, again, I think they are hurt by the fact that they won't have prospects to offer as well. But it certainly would be worth a shot for Ron Francis to take, and it certainly is fun to think about, as long as you're not a Sabres fan. Plus, from Buffalo's perspective, if you are going to have to trade Eichel anyway, it probably would serve you better to trade him out west to a team like Seattle, who you aren't going to have to play that often, than trade him to the Rangers, who you do have to play at least a little bit more frequently. But I certainly would be interested down in the comment section to see what you think a viable trade the Kraken could offer Buffalo in exchange for Eichel would be. Outside of that, though, and the Kraken license plates that released this week, as well as the pre-sale for some pretty sick-looking Dick's Drive-In Kraken jerseys, there hasn't been a whole lot else going on. So we have reached the end of this one. If you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you liked or enjoyed this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments section, and until next time, stay safe out there and be good to each other. Peace!